Do you want kids? That's a pretty sensitive question, right? For a lot of people, and maybe now more than ever.
Do I really want this? Because kids are the ultimate decision. There's a no return policy on that.
Why is it so permanent? How am I supposed to make that decision?
In the US, for example, a new survey suggests only about half of people between the ages of 18 and 34 say, yes, I want to be a parent. Now, maybe that number alone isn't shocking, but compare it to 2003, when 86% of Americans in that age group said they wanted kids. That's a pretty big shift over just a couple of decades. And in Canada, it's not all that different. When young adults here were asked in a survey a couple of years ago how many kids they planned on having, 34% said none. But a similar question in 2001, only around 7% of Canadians in the same age group said the same thing.
There has been a significant change in the proportion of people saying that they don't want to have children at all.
Raising a kid back then and raising a kid now are two very different times.
Now, neither of these two surveys asked people why they didn't think they'd become parents. But a lot of people have been trying to figure out the answer to that question over the past few years. The reasons obviously vary a lot from person to person, but there are a few factors that stick out. Let's start with an American study from a few years ago that tried to tackle the question head on, asking those people between 18 and 49 who said they weren't likely to have kids, why? Just over half said they just don't want to. The other half gave a bit more detail, citing everything from medical reasons to climate change to the state of the world.
This current generation just doesn't have the level of certainty that previous generations have. So there's a lot of people kind of saying, I don't know, I'm going to postpone and think about it and see what happens.
But there are a couple of reasons in there, in particular, that stood out to us, that show up repeatedly in Canadian data too, including the 15% who listed no partner. Now, of course, having a partner isn't required to have a kid, and a growing number of single people are doing it alone. But most people still prefer to be part of a team.
If they want to have children, they don't want to do it completely alone. They want to have a partner to share this with. And finding someone who you want to form a long-term partnership with, whether married or common law, is taking people longer and longer.
It's not entirely clear why it's taking people longer and longer, but the dating world has changed a lot over the past couple of decades.
Think about this. You can go on 3 dates with someone and have an amazing time and then never hear from them again.
A lot of the times apps lead us to undervalue people that we'd actually like in real life and overvalue people we wouldn't give a second thought to.
I know people that have met the love of their life on these apps, but also the overwhelming sentiment toward these apps is they don't work.
A few years ago, Pew asked those who were single and looking to rate how their dating life was going. 75% said it's been very or somewhat difficult to find a partner in the past year because they had trouble approaching people, trouble finding someone who wants the same type of relationship, or just finding someone who meets their expectations. About half of those respondents also agreed that dating has become more difficult over the past decade.
They look around and they see that it's taking people a long time, and that makes them question whether they're going to find that partner and then ultimately have children together, and maybe saying this maybe isn't going to happen for me.
Another reason on that list of reasons not to see kids in one's future was financial.
Children are expensive, and they're even more expensive in industrialized nations.
In Canada, a recent report tried to put a number on just how expensive. So let's take a middle-income, two-parent, two-child household, just as an example, since Stats Canada found that was the most common dynamic. Their report estimates a family in that category can expect to pay an average of $750,000, raising those two kids from birth to age 22. So that's if you add up food, clothes, education, childcare, transportation, everything. Even accounting for the extra you'd pay for a bigger home, right? Each extra bedroom per child. And when you factor in all those things, it adds up.
Just the base cost of feeding, clothing, educating a child is out of reach. And I can't imagine bringing a child into the world that I couldn't afford to help thrive.
And here's the thing, that study used data from 2014 to 2017. Since then, the cost of pretty much everything has gone up.
We're seeing these trends everywhere where we see increased education rates, where we see more expensive housing and things like that. Children have just become more expensive.
So, surprise, surprise, that same report suggests more than half of young Canadians who were considering kids did not think or were unsure if they could afford to have one in the next 3 years. Affordability concerns and lack of access to suitable housing were more recently cited as factors influencing the fertility intentions of Canadians, in particular among those aged 20 to 29.
Prenatal care, doctor's appointments, the hospital bills, and then after the baby's actually born, you have, diapers, food, wipes, clothes.
I'm just out here trying to survive on my own. You know what I mean? It is expensive.
There is an expectation among society and employers, probably more importantly, that if a woman has children, her job will no longer be her priority. And this is a measurable cost. We know that women who have children earn less than women who don't.
And one more thing about cost. If your parents ever told you, back in my day, we just went outside and climbed trees until it got dark, and meanwhile, you're zipping back and forth between soccer and gymnastics and swimming and piano, if you can even afford that, you know the expectations on parents have changed.
There's much more pressure coming from society to enroll your kids in multiple after-school programs, to provide them with additional things that kids 20, 30, 40 years ago weren't having. People have always wanted to be good parents and provide everything that they possibly can for their kids, but I do think we're seeing increasing social pressure to provide more.
I would love the conversation to stop being, don't have kids till you can afford them. What does that mean? That is so subjective. Afford what?
So those were some of the most common reasons given for not having kids in that survey, but it still feels like something's missing, doesn't it? Because if we come back to that pie chart for a second, remember, 56% of people said they weren't likely to have kids because they just don't want to. How can we explain that?
Randomly, my husband will look over at me and be like, you want to take a train to Paris this weekend? Yes, do what you want. Have kids, don't have kids. But hear me when I say you can live a fulfilled life without them.
There is no evidence that having children makes people happier. And I think that for young people, I think they recognize that. And so they are prioritizing other things.
A 2023 survey asked Americans to rank what they considered most important to them in order to live a fulfilling life. Number 3 was having children, but ahead of kids were 2 other factors, and they both commanded a lot more enthusiasm. Number 2 was having close friends. Now that's something that is, according to the researchers we spoke to, a pretty noticeable shift from previous generations.
This generation actually really values their free time, their leisure time. They spend more time socializing than previous generations, and so they're not really clear they want to give up on those elements of their lives in order to have children.
I love indulging my inner child. If I had kids, all of my time would be spent focusing on their schedule, focusing on their needs, focusing on all the stuff that helps make them successful humans, as opposed to myself.
And the number 1 factor people considered extremely important for living a fulfilling life was having a job or career they enjoy. And that was true for both men and women.
It may be that historically the stress on career would have been framed as in, I want to have this good career because I need to be able to support my family. Now we're hearing people talk about it more about their own personal satisfaction about it.
You can be ambitious and have kids. I'm not saying you can't, but my business is my baby. It takes up so much time, energy, stress. I just couldn't do that and have a kid.
It is now okay in society to choose to not have kids. So you can talk about making this choice, oh, I want to pursue my career and not have kids, and that's okay.
Now, to be clear, all of these studies we're talking about are capturing people's intentions at a single point in time. It's impossible to know how many of them will change their minds. The number of women over 50 without children has been rising steadily in both Canada and the United States over the past decade. And StatsCan projects the financial reasons holding people back in particular will do much to shape what future generations look like.